Well, hey there. Thank you for joining me today. I see we have a couple of questions already in the chat. Please chat below if you can see and hear me, just so I can make sure everything is working from a technical perspective as we get going. And also, if you wouldn't mind putting in your name if it's different than your handle, adding where you're from, because I think it's really cool that people can join from all over the world. And also, obviously, add your questions. And if you just found my channel, my name is Austin Menges, and I've been a pro editor for over 20 years with a focus on broadcast TV commercials. And if you like editing content, you should check out my free editing guide at the link below. When you sign up, you will subscribe to my email list where you'll get free tips weekly. And I'll also let you know about upcoming live streams like this one. And if you submit a question as a subscriber, I'll prioritize you on these live streams. So I'm going to be answering questions from students, from email subscribers, and of course, people in the chat. Hello, Guzman. Great to see you. Thanks for joining today. And hello, Walter. Good question. I'll get to that. And Arjun, great question as well. So while people are coming in, I know I started right at 9. I'm just going to start on a question from my email from a student named Doug. Shout out to Doug. He asked, oh, I better share my screen. I guess you guys can hear me. Hello. Hello, everybody. Let me share my screen. All right. Here we go. All right. So Doug asked, what's the number one visual effects skill expected from a professional editor? That is a great question, Doug. I would not consider myself a visual effects person, so these might seem really rudimentary. What I'm about to share might seem really simple to you all, but I'm just going to tell you what I do the most, and it would technically be considered a visual effect, probably. So I've talked about this a few times in previous videos. Hello, Anima Curiosity. Great to have you. And it's basically a simple split screen. So I edit a lot of comedy commercials. And when there is a static camera and two people talking to each other, just like this, hopefully you can see my screen share here. Here's Brett Favre, famous quarterback, talking to a really funny actor who's playing an insurance salesman. So when you have two characters talking to one another in this way, where they're not overlapping and it's a static camera, you can actually use different takes. So in one take, for instance, Brett Favre gave his best performance. And in another take, this actor gave his best performance. So if you see here, technically, I just muted the track below. Technically, this is a visual effect, and I would call this a split screen. And I use this a lot in my work because I'm always trying to I'm never taking the footage at face value where I would just pick a take and let it play. I'm always trying to find all the ways possible to enhance a commercial, especially in the commercial world. It's all about the details. You're really trying to make everything as perfect as possible. So all I did here was I have the take on my video track 1 is the take of both actors in the frame. And then above, you'll see Brett Favre slightly shifts here. I have a take above with his best take. And one of the cool things about this, I'll play it in motion, is not only did I use the take, but because of the split screen, I was actually able to cut out a few frames between when they both said their lines. So that is a visual effect that I use the most as a pro editor. Is that something you might use? I think it really depends on what type of editing you're doing. Hello, Pedro. Great to see you. Great to hear from you. MMWOSU. Oh, I love all the comments you leave. Really happy to have you all join me today. I decided to do this again because the first one was so fun. I think I might make this a regular Wednesday live stream. But to answer a couple more questions about the visual effects, I am constantly adding simple, slow zoom ins and slow zoom outs to enhance um, shots, basically. And so this obviously didn't need a zoom in or out, but I just go in my effects panel. You've probably done this. Maybe it starts at 35. You add a keyframe, and I think one thing people do. Rob, great to see you here. Thank you for joining. I think the key to a nice zoom in, that's way too much, right? So you can see how I added this zoom. But if I wanted to enhance this shot a little, it might be as little as a 0.5% or 1%. Let's do a 0.5%. So you can bear it. That's very imperceptible, okay? But I'm adding stuff like this all the time. And then one key thing, even in Premiere, hopefully you can see this, you can do something called ease in and ease out, and that makes your animation, makes the motion of the animation a little more realistic. So that would probably be the second visual effect that I do most is, and here's the interesting thing, even when you have a shot that is already has a zoom in the camera, sometimes I'll add an um, extra little zoom in or zoom out on the shot to kind of enhance it further, and that actually works. So you have the in-camera zoom, but then you're adding a little digital zoom on top of it. So beyond screen replacement, or sorry, split screens, like I showed you here, and then just nice subtle zoom ins and zoom outs where appropriate, keep them very subtle, almost imperceptible in most cases. Then just a basic screen replacement. So we're all making editing content that now has lots of screens. There's TVs in the background, there's phones. And if especially if it's static like a TV, it's pretty simple even in Premiere to do a basic mask and basically mask where the TV screen is and then put something behind it so it looks as if it is coming from the TV. So those are the three answers, Doug. Split screens, especially with actors in comedy that aren't overlapping with a static camera, slow zoom in and outs, and basic screen replacements. Okay, so I see we got some other people joining. Lions Share Gaming, thank you for your question. Keshav, Pedro, yes. Nicholas Paul Esteban. Okay, yeah, keep putting your questions in here. I'm going to go through a couple more that came in via email, and then I'm going to get to the live questions. But thanks everybody for being here, and please put where you're from. I know we have India, a couple from India. I think Rob, you're in Belgium, right? Um, Guzman is in maybe Connecticut, if I remember correctly. Great. Oh, Saudi. Awesome. Thanks for telling me. Okay. So I got a really good question. I think it was left as a YouTube comment. Here it is. I think that emotions are affected by culture and geographical barriers. A common funny scene may not be funny to an Asian audience, but would be to an American audience. So, do we only work on common emotions? Would love to hear your opinion on this. This is a great question, and it's something I haven't really touched on because I'm usually um, talking about emotion, and I'm talking about the emotion of the audience. So the first editing criteria we focus on is targeting the emotions you want the audience to feel. And this question brought up something really interesting that I'd love to talk about for a second. What about cultural differences in emotion? And one thing that came to mind is that this is particularly true with comedy and when the comedy is based on the actual language. So I think there are jokes like the person who asked the question pointed out, something might be funny in one culture and not funny in another culture. And I think that's so important. So I might start adding as a caveat, so you're targeting emotions for your audience, but I guess the second point would be, well, know your audience. And this is also true when you are going to do a test screening for something you're working on. So if I'm working on um, a commercial where the comedy is like really focused on teenagers, like maybe it uses language or kind of gags that are particularly funny to a younger crowd, I might not test it with a 70-year-old grandpa or grandma, right? Because that advice I'll be getting from the test screening might not match my target audience. So I do think it's important and crucial to know your audience, especially when you're doing test screenings and getting feedback, because it'll help you figure out what feedback to focus on and what to kind of leave aside. Now, all that to say, I think there are a lot of emotions that we target as editors that are universal. And that's one of the coolest things about filmmaking, I think. Like, say we have a sad scene, we're targeting sadness and despair. I think that can be felt in all cultures, which is a beautiful thing. And I think there's a lot of humor, like let's talk about physical comedy, for instance. I think that translates really well across cultures. So, on the one hand, know your target audience, and that's a great point this viewer brought up. But on the other hand, there's so many emotions that we can target that are universal, and that's one of the beautiful things about art and filmmaking. Um, okay, I have. Okay, we got awesome questions coming in. Thank you. Oh, we got Lions shares from Missouri. Excellent. Rob, if you came in late, no worries. I'm gonna always post these as a video so you could watch the playback. Oh, Pedro is from Portugal. Excellent. Oh my gosh, he's co-creator of a YouTube channel with 2.2 million subs. Whoa, dude, that's great. Thanks for joining. Okay, I'm gonna take before I dive into more questions from previous comments, I'm going to take some of the questions that were given in this live chat. So Arjun had the first question. I am a beginner editor and I use music for my edits. How do I get a rhythm and pace without using music? That is such a great question. So this is about creating pace or tempo is often about shot length, right? So here's an approach I'll throw out there. Well, what's the first shot in your sequence? And how long do you want it to be? And when is it inevitable? When does it feel inevitable that you want to cut to the next shot? Well, by selecting that first shot and how long you want it to be, you have in effect kind of set a tempo with that first shot. So then subsequent shots, think about making the next shots kind of in that ballpark. Um, and do that for the next few shots, however long your sequence is. And you will start to discover a tempo. And if you edit with one track, like I do, you'll see most of this edit I pulled in is on one track. And here, let me color code every other shot here so you can maybe see it better on my screen. One sec. Okay, cool. You can start to see there's kind of a rhythm that I've established. Do these two. Now, it's not perfect. I'm not cutting to the beat. I don't have music in here, but there is a tempo and it's easier to see, I think, when you edit on one track. So when you make that first shot and you go to your second shot, be thinking about making it kind of the same length, but not perfectly, kind of in the ballpark. And then same with the next shot and same with the next shot. And you'll end up with a sequence that's a sequence of shots where all the shots are kind of in that similar ballpark, even without music. And then I think when you watch it back, you'll get a sense of tempo even without there being music. Now, one little trick I'm going to give you, which I point out in one of my older videos, I think it's called Edit Like a Drummer, is try editing to music and then muting the music. And this will give you a little insight into what edits feel like when they're edited to a proper rhythm or an exact rhythm. But then you take out the music. So those are two little tricks you could try. Great question. Okay, Walter asks, hello, Walter. Is graphic design knowledge mandatory to become an editor? I hope not, because I'm terrible at graphic design. Um, I think as we go, we sort of you kind of are forced to learn a little bit. I mean, because often we're putting in our own. For me, they're usually temporary titles, um, very basic. Now, luckily, I'm in a field editing commercials where I get to collaborate with great designers, usually ad agencies who have employed top creative directors and art directors. So they aren't doing all the design, they're sending it to me, and I incorporate the design into the edit. Like, for instance, this end art card on this commercial, I did not make that. So the ad agency would come up with all that design for their client. Then there would be a professional motion graphics person to put this motion on it. And then I'm just cutting it in. Now I realize I'm in a fortunate position to have those collaborators. However, it is possible to have an editing career without being a designer. Now, I know a lot of content creators and different clients are now expecting more of an all in one approach. So, if those are the clients you are going for, it could be in your best interest to learn some graphic design. But that really depends on what type of clients you are going for. But no, it is not mandatory. Okay. I'm gonna go down here, Lion Share Gaming. What criteria do you use to guide your take selection? That is an excellent, excellent question. So I am very, one thing I teach is to really get familiar with your footage. When I started out, I would get a little too excited and I would kind of sort of watch footage, or I really just wanted to dive in and start throwing takes on the timeline because that was kind of the fun part for me, kind of putting things together and building the story. But as I progressed in my career, I think I got to a point where I sort of began to understand that having an intimate knowledge of the footage was one of the most important things, rather than all the editing itself. So I take a lot of time to watch through footage. I will put it up on my big screen. I'll sit back. I'll watch takes all the way. I'll watch all of the footage all the way through without even taking notes one time. And then maybe on the second time through, I'll take notes. And what I'm looking for, and this is a little might sound a little esoteric, especially with performance, with actors, what I'm looking for is truth and authenticity in a performance. So, believable truth, authenticity um, in a moment, in a performance, and special moments. So that second time through, when I'm watching, that's what I'm looking for, and it's a little bit on instinct. But when I see something that feels very truthful and real, even if it's a comedy, it's doesn't just because I'm talking about truth and authenticity doesn't mean it's um, actors acting with great emotion. It's just any sort of truth and authenticity. Just like when I chose this take, that felt very real to me and good, and hit the target emotion of getting a laugh from the audience, hopefully. So that's what I would say: truth, authenticity, and but then there's also a technical aspect you have to kind of lay over that. Is the camera move doing the right thing? Is it in the right place? Is all the art direction in the right place? And then for if I'm doing more of a montage, like I do in some of my exercises, I'm kind of looking for what grabs me for the story. So I always start with the target emotion of the audience and the story in mind before I watch my footage to do my take selection. So I have kind of this underlying guidance of what I'm looking for. And then I will watch through, I'll mark all the takes that I find interesting, and then I will try them in the edit. I'll try all of the ones I looked at, but I'm always willing to go back and try ones that I didn't initially mark because it's so important when you're watching a string out. That's very different than trying things in your actual edit. So it's key to actually try and test all these um, all these different takes you're using. You got to try them in the edit. And then when one thing changes, that might create kind of a butterfly effect where you have to try everything else. So, great question. I hope that was a little bit helpful. Okay. The logic. Okay. We have a question from Nicholas. I was watching your video yesterday about you have to cut using emotions. I understand the logic for filmmaking, but do you think this can be applied with a real estate video? Real. Of course it can. Yes, because Nicholas, we're talking about the emotions of the audience. So this actually gets back to who's your target audience. Okay. So who's the target audience for a real estate video and what do you want them to feel? And for a real estate video, well, like for instance, for this comedy commercial, I want the audience to laugh. I want them to feel levity and lighthearted. For a real estate video, you might want them to feel impressed or curious. Or it might be more of an educational type video where you're just doing a tour. You want them to feel interested. You don't want them to get bored. That would be a bad emotion. So, yes, absolutely. Every video should have an underlying target emotion behind it, in my opinion. And from a real estate video to a feature film scene where something crazy happens, right? This is editing with intent. Like my YouTube videos, I'm an educator in my YouTube videos. So what I'm mostly trying to do is have the audience feel curious and have a sense of understanding. So I'm trying to be clear, but I don't want them to get bored. So I'm trying to move things along, especially in the videos where I edit a little bit more. But there's no crazy bombastic editing where I'm trying to go for a big emotion of you guys crying. No, I'm teaching you something. So that's kind of goes hand in hand. You really, for any video project, you want to have your target audience in mind. And I'm glad you brought that up because I want people to understand that um, they can be thinking this way for all videos, and it's not just for like a narrative short, for instance. Okay. Oh, okay. Rob says, with documentaries, have you ever asked a director to reenact something to fill a gap in editing? I'm in Los Angeles. That's a great question, and I'm sure that comes up. And that would be challenging to reenact a live documentary type setting that happened on camera. I have never been in a position with that, but I have done pickup lines for voiceover, I believe. So you can go back and record audio to fill in the gaps. That's a lot simpler than reenacting a whole scene. But yes, when you have a story and you are manipulating reality a little bit in documentary because we're still trying to tell a cohesive story for the audience. And if you have, let's say, two scenes that are working really well, but you're just missing this one crucial piece of information, it's totally reasonable to go back and record a pickup line. Now, I will say I do have friends who work on like basically reality television, and a lot of that is scripted and reenacted. They'll basically have a script that is written for the reality television, and then they will shoot a whole episode based on that script, and they will do almost all of the interviews after the fact with writers to make all the comedic beats work. So there's a lot of flexibility in that genre, like whatever you're watching on whatever the reality TV shows are lately. Let's see. Great question. Very interesting. Okay, let's see if we got another one here. Let's see. When using Adobe Premiere, what file do you send to Audio Post? Yeah, an AAF. Yes, absolutely. And that's a question from Funny Montage. Yes, I used to send OMFs back in the day, but at some point, it became clear that the AAF was more stable. So that was requested by the audio engineer I collaborate with um, most of the time on my commercial projects, and we have had great luck with AAF files. So I highly recommend it. Oh, Arjun. Okay, we got another good question here. Color grading knowledge. Is it mandatory to become an editor? This is another one where I am in a privileged position where I have collaborators, so I get to collaborate with colorists, and that is the large majority of my projects. So I am basically, for most of my projects, what I am working with is the LUT that the cinematographer chose on set. So I edit mostly ARRI or ARRI Alexa footage, and the DPs that shoot these commercials I'm working on often will have a custom LUT that they put in the camera, so the director and the ad agency on set can see a pretty nice version, pretty closely replicate the final image on set with their LUT, kind of how they want the camera to handle the image. And they will send that to me as part of the raw footage. And I just make sure I have that on so that all my rough cuts feel a little bit closer to the color corrected final. And then the colorist will even, they'll look at that, what the LUT was, because they'll use that sort of as a starting place. Not necessarily that they're going to keep the LUT on during color, but that they kind of know what everybody was familiar with from onset through the rough cut stages. Now, I think color is a great skill to have because if you're working on projects where there's not a budget to hire a separate colorist, it's a good skill to have. So I definitely recommend learning some basic color. It can definitely help you. In fact, I have done projects where I've done all of the color grading. I've been paid specifically to color grade something. So I do have some knowledge. And one thing I will make one slight um, well, let me explain the slight difference between color grading and color correction. I think most editors should have basic color correction skills. And what I mean by that is fixing exposure. So that would be more of a color correction, fixing exposure between two shots. Let's say one shot was like a little overexposed and one shot's a little under. Okay. So you're going to want to be able to make some of those little adjustments. Or maybe let's say one shot's just a little green and it's more green than the other shots. You might want to be able to dial out a little green. So those are or contrast, add in, take out a little contrast. Those are things that are very helpful to have, and I do recommend that. Now, color grading is more of the artistic look of the final image, and that's sort of a separate art. But I think on the more technical side, yes, you're going to want some basic color correction skills for sure. Okay, excellent, excellent. Thank you all so much for adding your comments. All right. Okay, let's see here. Well, we have a question about nodal editing, which is a really near and dear to my heart. So, Keshev, let's talk about nodal editing. Um, Basically, there is I think a lot of editors who start out, myself included, we think of editing and the most obvious place to cut is when there's actions happening, meaning an action in the frame. So let's say you have um, a person. Let's say I'm the shot, and I raise my hand up and put it down. Okay, and let's say there's a wide shot of me doing this, and then there's a close up. So when we're first editing, we pull in those two shots, right? And we go, oh, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to match the action. So in the wide shot, this clip of Austin, he's going to have his hand in the air, and then I'm going to cut to the close up as he's pulling it down, and I'm going to get that frame just right to match the arm to hide that edit. Don't get me wrong, that is an important tool in the editor's tool belt to be able to do a match on action, and it does indeed help disguise the edit. But there's another layer of editing that is more important than disguising edits, and that is deciding based on your intuition, based on the emotion you're targeting, when things feel inevitable. And this is just comes with practice. So nodal editing, and sorry to do this with this silly um, example, but I might, in the wide shot, lift my arm up, pull it down, and then after my arm's down, I cut to the next shot. So I let the whole action play out in the shot. So I'm not cutting on the action. I'm letting each node or clip include the whole action. And what this does is it allows me to choose when I go to the next action. And let's just see what happens in this commercial that I have to see if we can look at this. So Brett Favre comes in, he turns around, and then he nods his head, right? Now, a match on action would be, oh, maybe I'm going to cut to a close up when he's halfway through his turn. But no, in nodal editing, I'm going to let the action of this shot be Brett Favre turning, nodding out. Okay. Then we have the action of this shot, moves his hands, nods. So it's a series of contained actions. And the actions are, we call them, I'm calling them nodes because that's what Walter Murch calls them. So that's just a little bit more explaining that. But also keep in mind here, there's no perfect answer to any of these questions. These are options. So you're going to use your decision making and your intuition on when to use a match on action cut or when to use more a nodal approach. So hang in there and just keep trying different things. And I think you're going to get to a point where it starts to click for you. So just hang in there through this point, okay? But hopefully that gave a little more clarity to some of the other videos I've done on nodal editing. So great question. Okay, I've got another question. In commercial editing, do the clients have requested on-set editor? If yes, do you wait the ProRes file or edit the raw or use a capture card? Okay, on the sets I work, great question. On the sets I work on, there's a dedicated DIT. I think that stands for Digital Intermediate Technician. That's not me usually. When I go to set, I'm usually script supervisor, which is a whole nother thing. And that's not very common, but I do highly recommend it because I'm sort of as script supervisor, I'm like another eye on continuity and getting lines right, and then I'm there on set, and that gives me a head start in post. So that's kind of a special scenario. But the digital intermediate technician, they are going to be copying the exact media that's on the cards. So, like for an Arri Alexa, that's MXF files, and then they have special software to confirm that it was all backed up properly. And we do shoot in the MXF wrapper. I do prefer they shoot ProRes. ProRes 4444, also known as Quad 4, and then at whatever pixel size and aspect ratio the cinematographer and the director decided on. But Airy Raw is wonderful, but it takes up so much space. And there's almost no visual effects you do in post that require Airy Raw compared to ProRes Quad 4, except maybe if you were pulling a key. So, like the colorist I work with in Austin, basically, he gave me the go ahead. Just use ProRes 4444. The great thing about ProRes 4444 is that my hard drives are fast enough that I don't even have to make proxies. I just edit with this beautiful, almost uncompressed feeling footage, and I highly recommend ProRes 4444. I've shot ARRI RAW in the past, and it just ends up adding a lot to the workflow. Now, if you're working on a big feature film with a big Hollywood budget, they are probably um, working with ARRI RAW is my guess. Oh, especially with a lot of visual effects because they have the workflow and the infrastructure to handle it. But that's sort of what I think about that. Okay, excellent. My favorite films that every editor should watch. Well, that's a great question. Some of my favorite recent films, just Christopher Nolan films. I love Christopher Nolan. Interstellar is one of my favorite films. I loved Oppenheimer. Um, I'm a big fan of also action movies. I don't know if you guys are excited about the new Mission Impossible, but I'm a sucker for that stuff. Um, yeah, so that's just some of my favorite movies. Raiders of the Lost Ark is my all-time favorite movie, which got me into. Um, oh, we have somebody from Gambia. Thank you so much. Um, we have yeah, Raiders of the Lost Ark, Star Wars. You guys put in some of your favorite films that editors should watch. The Usual Suspects, incredible editing. Okay, excellent. I'm gonna answer some questions that I got in email. So I'm gonna shift to email a little bit. You guys can add more questions below if you like. I got a question that is I'm going to answer Pedro. Pedro, thank you for being here. I'm going to answer your question. How do you use the compressor limiter and EQ for the perfect final mixing, regardless if the YouTube video is watched on a phone, tablet, or TV? That is an excellent question. What I like to focus on, I'm going to start with something a little different. I'm going to start by saying the first thing with any recording or mixing project, whether it's music or video, is the source. So you want to start with a great microphone and a great performance. Um, so I would say that first. That is helpful. And a great way to capture it. So, like, I use an Apollo Twin X, and then I also have outboard gear. Um, so I have a great signal chain. And then specifically, compressor, limiter, and EQ. So for vocals, I use Isotope Neutron. And I think a really cool shortcut, especially when you're dealing with these high-end plugins, is to start with their presets. So Isotope has incredible presets on their Neutron plugin that sound great. So honestly, I think I went through every dialogue preset, and the Neutron plugin includes EQ, and compression and a gate or some different things. And so I just went through all these presets and I found one that sounded best for my voice. And that's key because remember, it's all about your ears. So you want to be listening on good monitors. But I'd say find great, and there's even pretty decent plugins and presets um, in your editor. So DaVinci, their audio tab has really good stuff. Premiere has some. But I would always put an EQ and a compressor on the vocals in particular. And then the key for me is you get your balance, get your levels right. In my last live stream, I talked a little bit about some ways to set levels. The key for me is to work on your overall loudness. So I highly recommend having a plugin like Waves Loudness Meter on your mix track. And I used to recommend a loudness level of negative 14 dB, but I've since changed on YouTube to negative 16. I thought negative 14 was a little too loud, a little too harsh. And with negative 16, there's a little more dynamic range. And one thing I like for my YouTube channel is that since I made that change, every single one of my videos is around negative 16. So when people are watching multiple videos, hopefully they have a uh, a common listening experience, which I think is nice. And then I did test them initially when I was coming up with my settings. I watched it on my phone, my TV, basically those two. Oh, and in headphones because they all sound a little different. And I would recommend you do the same. So when you come up with some settings, you find some EQ and compression settings you like, you've balanced everything out, you have the set loudness that you're going to do. I recommend listening through your mixes. So maybe you upload to YouTube, keep it as unlisted, listen on your headphones, listen on speakers, listen on your phone speaker, listen on your TV, and then make adjustments that kind of are a good compromise between all those. And that's a lot of how professional mixing engineers work in the music world as well. They will take a mix and listen to it on all these um, different um, outputs, basically. And one super interesting thing is the audio engineer I work with on most of my commercial mixes, they actually have, um, so they have like these speakers, surround sound speakers that are tens upon tens of thousands of dollars, but then they also have these tiny, terrible speakers to represent kind of the worst way the mix would be heard. And they always, at the end, after we're really happy with the mix, will listen to it through these terrible speakers that kind of represent an iPhone. So even in the setting where you're in this fancy studio, we're always checking on um, these other speakers because so many people, as we all know, um, are listening on their iPhones. So great question. We just have to deal with that. Okay, I have another question that comes up a lot. A lot of you want to learn about sound design, which I'm glad about because that's one of my favorite things to talk about. It's one of my favorite things to do. And the comment was simply, how do we create an immersive sound design? That is a great question. And here is a challenge I would like to give you all. Okay. Um, I think a lot of us can get stuck. We get in a sound design, we get to the sound design part of our video. Hopefully that's early on. I recommend working on the sound as you're working on your edit, right? Um, and then we just kind of start searching in whatever. So I got my art list library here. I got my SFX. Okay, I'm just going to start typing and searching. I have a challenge for you that I think may help you when you're thinking about an immersive sound design. I think we all need to spend more time coming up with the sound design ideas before we start diving into the actual work. So let me give you an example. I might open up a Google Doc. Maybe you're a pen and paper person. And I'm just gonna use this as an example because it's open. You know what? No, I'm gonna go to a different example. Let's see, because this is kind of some interesting shots that I might use in an upcoming exercise. Look at your shots and ask yourself, what are possible sounds for this shot? And do a little brainstorm and go through as many shots as you can in your piece before you start searching and getting caught up in sort of the technical um, and even the listening. And I want you to brainstorm sounds that are in the shot and they may be outside the world of the shot. I actually have a YouTube video coming up where I do this exercise with Scott Rice. But for instance, what could be the sounds of this shot? Well, obviously, you have geese or ducks, so that should be on the list. But then what's the weather like? It looks a little cold, so maybe there's a slight wind. What's something that could be off screen? Maybe they're near water, so maybe there's some waves off screen as you build this kind of world. Maybe there's birds flying overhead, so that's kind of a different sound. It's not even in the shot, but it's a brainstorm of what sounds could bring this shot to life. Okay, and this is even before you get to music. Let's go. Obviously, here we have waves and water. Well, maybe there's a boat going by. Maybe there's a barge off in the distance going by, depending where I am um, in the world. Okay. Then we have a shot like this. Well, I see some clouds here. So maybe there's a thunderstorm. Maybe it's about to rain. We have a guy in a jacket. So maybe there's slight rain hitting water sounds. We obviously have boats that are more sailboat like, but maybe there's some boats with engines going by. Maybe it's windy. Um, are you guys kind of tracking with this? I think we need to have a step with our sound design where we're really having a creative brainstorm, even if we're by ourselves. Maybe it's with a collaborator. And before we jump into our sound effects library, we have a big list of all these creative ideas. So in short, I think we can get stuck where we just get into the technical side of sound design. Sure, we're listening to sounds, we're diving in, but we need to take a step back and really hone our skills at coming up with the idea for the sound. Okay, did all that come through? That was a long answer, but thanks for listening. So I have a little video coming out where we do some of that, and we talk about creating a building a world, some creative sound design concepts. Okay, excellent. Let's see. All right. I'm going to answer another question here about music licensing. It was a YouTube comment. I think maybe it was from MMWOSU. Um, I didn't have it written down here. I apologize. Okay. Music licensing compared to royalty-free libraries. Yeah, let's talk about music a little bit. So a lot of us use sites like Artlist. I use it all the time, even on commercial projects. Um, these are great sites like Artlist, Epidemic Sound. They're great sites, especially for creators, because the license covers everything, which is not great for the musicians, but it's great for us as editors, great for clients. Um, people like it for that reason. So maybe there's some limitations in quality, but I think if you really dig in these different libraries, you can find great stuff, right? So even these libraries have a license. You just don't have to interact with it much. But basically, as an Artlist subscriber, I can download any piece of music and use it on any of my projects or any of my client projects. The only limitation is I don't own the music just because I downloaded it. So I can't sell it myself or include it in something I sell. I can just use it on the projects, right? So then the next level up would be a proper license. And I was going to point out a really great music library called MusicBed, and they have a team that will help you come up with a license. And this is where you'd find a piece of music and you would pay a one-time price for that piece of music based on where you want to show it and what you're showing it in. So you'd probably work with a rep, and they would ask you a series of questions, and the price is going to be based on this. So one key factor is, where are you going to show it? Are you showing it globally? That's usually the answer these days with YouTube and social media. But often for broadcast TV commercials that I work on, they're showing it regionally. So if I work on a broadcast commercial and it's just showing in the state of Utah for 6 months, so that's the duration, how much would that cost? And they're going to have prices for all that. And It also matters if you're using the music in paid advertising or organic content. So sometimes I might work on a video that is for a client that's just going to appear on their website. Okay. So that's called organic. But if they use that video and they actually have a paid media buy where they're going to show that video on TV, on YouTube, on Instagram, and they're paying every time that plays, that's going to be a higher price. So depending on the artist, depending on your specs like that, the price to license an individual song for a certain duration of time in a certain area might be between 200 and $500, in my experience, or 100 to $500. And then a step past that would be to actually work with a composer, and that's my favorite, when I get the opportunity to do that, and then you're paying maybe 500 to $1,000 per cue or per minute. It really depends, but you're gonna have to have a budget in the thousands usually to work with a composer. So those are some different levels to aim for, when you get on projects that are sort of moving past the capabilities of a site like Artlist or a site like Epidemic Sound. Okay, we got a couple more questions here. Let's see. What's my biggest project? The biggest projects I work on? Probably just commercials. I'm a commercial editor, so I get to occasionally work on projects, um, commercial projects that have really cool crews, like um, really great cinematographers. That's one thing that I love about commercials, and I will talk about. When you work on higher budget commercials, there's usually really great directors, like my friend Scott Rice, and then really great cinematographers. So I worked on a campaign that was shot by Jimmy Lindsay, and he shot the pilot of the show Veep, and he just shot that new Arnold Schwarzenegger show, and he shot Second Unit on Ghostbusters. So it's fun to meet him and get to work with his footage. He also shot Treasure Imagination, that short film that I worked on. So, and then my other dear friend, Rick Diaz, I get to edit a lot of his stuff, and he's a cinematographer that was nominated for an ASC award for Winning Time on HBO. He shot Second Unit on Stranger Things. So I love that on commercials, I get to work with footage from really great cinematographers and directors. That's one of my favorite things about it. Um, okay, how much are modern commercial post houses open to remote work? I work remotely for a couple of clients, but it's not that high budget projects I would like to work on. I live in a very small market. Oh, that's a great question. I would say, in my experience, commercial post houses usually have their own internal teams. So that can be tricky. I'm in a very odd position because I have certain directors I work with who request me, even though I'm not part of a post house. And that's pretty rare. I'm very thankful and lucky for that. But in my experience, post houses are usually just hiring internal. So they have their editors, who are on their website. They're basically a talent roster, and that's where all their jobs are funneling to. So unless you worked near a post house, you might be able to kind of get in the door as an assistant and maybe work your way up, but that can be pretty complex. So you might have better luck trying to go directly to clients or ad agencies, instead of trying to get in the door at a post houses. Okay, I have another question from Nikolai. Any trends in sound design and music you see coming? Should we follow the crowds, or are there anything we can do to become more unique? Trends in sound design and music. Oh, that's a great question. One trend, I'll talk about this for a second. I am very not interested in the they call it retention editing on YouTube, where everything is overly sound designed. Sorry, a lot of sound design can be a good thing. What I don't enjoy is unmotivated sound design or unmotivated music, and I would like it all to be a little toned down, which I try to do on my channel. Even just having a little intro music on my videos, sometimes I'm like, I should probably just get rid of that and just let this be educational videos. But yeah, I would say that's particular to YouTube. But trends in sound design and music, I would say, one thing I think about, because so many people have access to these sites like Artlist and Epidemic Sound, you start to hear a lot of the same tracks, because it's often sorted by like the client picks. for the best for whatever track. So you kind of hear them over and over. So I do think one trend you can get ahead of is trying to find different place to access music sometimes, or try to get on a project that has a budget where you can do an individual license for music bed with a cool artist, or maybe you actually find an artist you're friends with and try to source sounds that way. So I think it's going to be cool to have some more unique music options, when a lot of people out there are using these library tracks. Not that there's anything wrong with those, um, but that is a great question. Okay. I'm going to answer. I got time for a couple more questions. And I just want to really thank you all so much for joining. Um, really appreciate it. This is really fun for me. So keep adding your questions to YouTube videos. Email me if you're on my email list. And I will keep coming and answering these. I think I'm going to do this every Wednesday. So it should be fun. It's fun for me because you all make it fun. I'm really thankful for this community because you guys are serious about learning editing, and you all are very kind and encouraging, and I hope to be the same for you. So really appreciate it. Okay, I'm going to answer my methodology. Only son, who's a common, or he's a frequent commenter. I really appreciate him. He asked, "What is my methodology for picking clients or projects?" That is a great question. I actually have a video. I think the thumbnail says editing career advice. And there's three things I look for when picking projects. And I totally get it. You might not be in a position to pick projects. That's okay. This is also a way to look at projects you've already completed. So you can kind of start developing the self awareness on what type of projects you like best, what type of projects you want to get more of, what worked, what didn't work. I really recommend after every editing project, you do that kind of self awareness check and kind of do like a debrief with yourself on what was good about it, what was bad about it, what could you have done better, what did you do well. But I call it the three things I'm thinking about are I call it the three R's: relationship. Who did you work with? Who was your boss or your client? Who were your collaborators? So that's relationship, right? Then I think about real, and that stands for would you put this on your demo reel? Usually, when we think about making our demo reel, we think about we think about putting stuff on it that we're really creatively proud of. So the R for real is kind of like how creatively fulfilling was this project? And then the third, obviously, R is rate. What did you get paid um, for the project? And that's very important, but it's not the only thing. So it's kind of a combination of real, rate, and relationships. And now at this point in my career, I try to have all three, and I am lucky enough to have all three most of the time, but sometimes I don't. For instance, let me give you an example. Let's Sometimes I will take a highly reduced rate, even now 20 years into my career, if it's a relationship that I highly value, and it's a creative, or it's a project that is right up my alley creatively, extremely creatively fulfilling. So I'm willing to reduce my rate because those other two categories are so high. Um, or maybe let's take a look at a different version. What if it's a high rate and a great relationship, but the creative's terrible? Well, we all have to pay our bills, right? And it's great if I get to work with a friend. So if a friend calls me, can pay me my full rate, but it's a corporate video that I'm really not excited about, sure, I'll do that job. And it'll just kind of be a fun time to work with a friend who I enjoy. I'm paying my bills, which is a wonderful thing to be able to make a living as an editor. Wonderful. Um, and then occasionally, this is pretty rare. I pretty much don't budge on the relational aspect anymore because I really value working with people I like to work with. But occasionally, you'll get a project, maybe it's a commercial, and I have done this, where the rate is your full rate. The commercial is great creative. Like, you're like, oh my gosh, this is going to be cool. This is going to go right on my demo reel. It's going to help me get more jobs. But you've heard that the person you'll be working for is pretty difficult, pretty hard to work with. It's not going to be great. But maybe that's just like a 2 or 3 week project. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to take it. And you kind of deal with some of that dysfunction because you know the project. Well, one, you're paying your bills. Two, you're making this great um, project that you can use on your demo reel. So that's how I kind of look at projects. I have a more advanced method I'm working on to rank projects that I'm working on as part of some new content, which I was going to ask all of you. I really wanted to focus on the craft of editing first, in terms of my course, but now I want to make the other half of it, which is the business of editing. So I'm going to be creating another module for that. I did want to just shout out to the chat to see if that's stuff you guys would be interested in. Um, but if you're interested in just the craft of editing, that's already live, and you can check out my course. Where I'm having students really make some really cool stuff, and I give my personal feedback, which is really the most fun for me, is to watch students create incredible edits. But I'll be working on some new content on more the business side. So let me answer one more question before I have to go. Paranoid Android, great name. I'm a big Radiohead fan. Um, Maybe aging myself there, but OK Computer, incredible. And then Kid A is one of my favorite albums of all time. I assume you got that from Radiohead, but all right. Any advice for overcoming the insecurity of not knowing if I'm making the right creative decisions while editing? I often get stuck and it ends up taking me a long time to finish projects. This is such a great question. I appreciate your vulnerability in asking this because I think we can all relate. Editing is an art form. It's a craft, but it's an art. And art is scary. So we all have insecurity, we all have fear. There is a great book I'll recommend. I'll throw this out. It's called Art and Fear, and it's a great read just for anyone who's in the art making business about the fear of making art and putting ourselves out there. But insecurity of not knowing if I'm making the right creative decision. Here's what I would say. Here's my best advice for this problem. Get in the habit of showing people your work. Get so good at showing people your work that it's second nature and that it's just no big deal. And start to find people who you show your work to that you really trust their advice and their input. And when you add this to your tool belt, and I haven't always, but now it's just second nature. I never get stuck now. You know why? Because I send it off and ask people. Like you've seen Scott Rice on the channel a ton. He's one of my people. Whether I'm editing for him or not, he will always watch something I have. You're gonna have. I highly suggest you find some people in your life. Maybe it's a friend group. Ideally, if it's more of a mentor who can watch your stuff, but even your colleagues, like in my editing course, I now have a community, and there's a few people on the chat like Guzman and Rob, and maybe others. Sorry if I forgot you. We're in there now. They're posting work, not just the course assignments, but they're posting their other work. It's hard to get stuck when you can easily show your work and then get feedback and then make changes based on that feedback. And I think when we are in isolation, it's much easier to get stuck. So, my best piece of advice is to find some people. And here's the other thing, you can also be that person for somebody else. So, like in the community that I have, I might post something and everybody will give me feedback. But then when they post something, I'm going to give them feedback because there's no question, in addition to the insecurity aspect, also, man, when you are staring at the same timeline for 8 hours, day after day after day, we kind of lose our bearings. Comment if you've been there before. Um, and so it's not even about insecurity at that point. It's just like, what am I even doing? What do I even have here? What I've gone down all these roads. Where do I go next? Did I mess it all up? Kind of all these questions come to mind. And I have the same problem, 20 years in. I don't know if that ever goes away, but I think what you can do is have the solution where you have people you can show so that when you feel stuck, you can get feedback and be ready to show them a couple different versions. You could say, hey, I'm stuck. I created this version a few days ago. I went down some rabbit holes. I created this version. What are you seeing? What's your feedback? What kind of emotions is this um, triggering for you? Because I want to see if it aligns with what I'm going for. That was a wonderful question to end on. Again, if you're not subscribed to my email list or if you don't have my free editing guide, go grab it. I think you'll really like it. I worked hard on it. Thousands of people have downloaded it and gotten a lot out of it. And then you'll be on my list so I can tell you when I'm having another live stream or when I have a course sale or whatever. And then if you want to go deeper, do check out my editing course. I'm having a ton of fun watching editors improve quickly with personal feedback from me. It's really been my favorite part of this whole channel. And then, of course, meeting people like you guys. So thank you for being here. I really appreciate it. I plan now to do this weekly. So weekly on Wednesdays. Please come back. Leave me more questions. This is a blast for me. Thank you all for coming and happy editing.